Okay, this video is a little different from my previous lesson videos. The purpose of the video is to answer the question, are guitar chords the same as piano chords? So I was looking up queries related to music and guitar, and this is one of the more popular questions that people are searching for in search engines. So again, the question is, are guitar chords the same as piano chords? So first we need to answer the question, what is a chord? And to find the answer to that, we'll look in the Oxford Companion to Music. Okay, and here under harmony, just beneath food, condiments, and Wagner, we find the following definition. Any combination of notes simultaneously heard can be called a chord. So any group of notes played together can be called a chord. Okay, so we know the definition of a chord is any group of notes played together. So that means a minimum of 2 notes. Now, there's a specific name for a 2-note chord that's called a dyad. And there is a kind of chord, a 2-note chord that's very common on the guitar, that's called a power chord. But to be clear, we're not talking about those right now. What we need to look at is, at minimum, a 3-note chord, which is a triad. And there's a specific way that triads are constructed. So what we'll do is have a quick look at the piano. We'll build a couple of triads on the piano, and then we'll go to the guitar and have a look at those same chords and see how they differ. To build a C major triad, we'll begin with the C major diatonic scale. Here's our middle C. And what we'll do is play all of the notes up to this next C here. So we'll play all of the notes in this octave. So in total, we have the 8 notes of the diatonic major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now what we'll do is use these 3 notes. The first, the third, and the fifth. And what you should notice is that these are all 3 notes apart. And so it's the stacking of these thirds that creates the triad. Now we can also change the order of the notes in the chord. So we can begin on the 3rd note, play the 5th note here, and move the root to the top of the chord. This is the first inversion of the triad. And we can continue on, this time playing the 5th at the bottom, the root as the 2nd note, and the 3rd on the top of the chord. This is the 2nd inversion of the triad. So regardless of how the notes are stacked on top of each other, what inversion is used, and regardless of how many times the notes are repeated above or below in different octaves, as long as those are the only 3 notes being used, in this case C, E, and G for the C major triad, as long as those are the 3 notes being used, the chord that is being played is a C major triad. Whether it's on the piano or a guitar or any other instrument, a C is a C. However, there are some other differences we can see in how this chord is played on a guitar. Let's have a look. Okay, so here I am with the guitar, and the plan is to build a C major triad just like we did on the piano. Now on the piano, if you remember, I just started with the C major scale, playing the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes. And of course I was playing only the white keys. The piano is laid out in such a manner that the first thing you see is the C major scale. And then you have these black notes, which are raised up just a little bit. But you'll notice that the black notes are located in between the white notes. So they are ordered. And that order, if you play through those notes, is the chromatic scale, which sounds like this. And that is how the guitar is laid out. It's laid out chromatically. So to play the same notes, I would simply play every single fret starting with a C. So as I said, when we look at a piano, we see the C major scale. When we look at a guitar, we just see the chromatic scale. What that means is that we need to overlay the pattern of the major scale onto the chromatic scale in order to play it. On the piano, this is already done for us. So the pattern for the major scale is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So while I did say that on the piano, that pattern is already laid out for us to see, we still need to use that pattern if we want to play in other keys. And obviously most pianists do play in other keys, and so they need to still apply that pattern to the piano. It's just that to begin with, we have a nice, easy setup with the C major scale. On the guitar, they're laid out chromatically. If we look at the fretboard diagram, you'll be able to see the equivalent of the white keys and the black keys on a keyboard. Now, standard tuning on a guitar is the following: E, A, D, G, B, E. What that means is that the guitar is very similar to having 6 separate keyboards, each laid out chromatically moving upward. What that means is that there are many different ways to play a chord. It also means that there are many different places you can play the same note where you can't do that on a piano. So for example, this middle C can only be played in that location. Whereas on the guitar, we can play a middle C here, 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 and here. Now that alone tells us there are at least 4 different locations to play the exact same triad. Okay, so now let's build a triad on the guitar. And we'll start with the C major scale just as we did on the piano. As I had mentioned previously, we can find our notes by moving up chromatically from the note of the open string. So we're going to start on a C down here. We know that's a C because this is the A string. Moving up chromatically, we know that the notes would be A sharp, B, and C. And of course we can do that with all of the strings. And we'll find the C major scale here. So again, we're going to select the first, third, and fifth notes from that scale. So we have our C, E, and then we have G as the open string. And that's our C major triad. Now what we'll do is continue along, and we'll find that on the B string, we have C as the first fret, which is of course the root of that chord. And then the E string up here is the third of that chord. So we can play this is a C chord, okay? And now this is the standard voicing for an open C chord on the guitar. This will be one of the first chords that any guitarist learns, is this shape of a C chord. Let's look at that C chord on the piano by playing the exact same notes as we played on the guitar. So we started off with a C 1 octave below middle C. Here's middle C. There's our octave below. We had the third above that, major third. Remember, we had the open G string. Then we were playing the first fret on the B string, the C, and an open E. So this is the same voicing being played on the piano. And I can tell you right now that it isn't really a typical voicing that you'd see on the piano. If you said to a pianist, play me a C chord, it isn't very likely that they would play this. A more common voicing would be, for example, doubling up the root 1 octave lower in the bass. That's a bit more typical. keeping in mind that that voicing still has that root position in the center. It's just it has the notes on either side. So again, looking at the original question, are the same chords used on the guitar as are used on the piano? We can see right there that, well, not really. We know that yes, it is a C chord. It incorporates the same basic notes, but it's a different voicing. And on the guitar, as I mentioned, that is a very common voicing. That's a standard voicing that every guitarist would learn and use. But on a piano, not so much. Although it is similar. Okay, this time let's take a look at a G chord. Just as we did with the C, we'll look at a standard open position voicing on the guitar. Okay, so let's look at the G chord on the piano now. So starting with that low G down on the E string, which is here. Next note up was the B on the A string. Then we had the open D string. Then the open G string. The open B string. And then a G on top of that on the high E string. Okay, and again, I would say that's not a very common voicing. Again, if you said to a pianist, play me a G chord, they probably wouldn't play you that. Okay, but there is something interesting to note about this, is that it has this G hovering up here, quite a bit higher. Whereas I said that on the piano, you might see the octave doubled below. So it's almost the opposite of that. Let's look at this again. What you might do, or what you might see on a piano, is the removal of the B and D down here, and the simple addition of a D up here. And that would be a more common voicing. Okay, so I won't go through all of the examples of the open chords, but looking at the voicing of an open D chord on the guitar, likewise, you wouldn't really see that as a go-to chord on the piano. Looking at the voicing for an open A chord, that wouldn't be a very common voicing on the piano. However, the open E chord is very close. Okay, and the open E chord would look like this on a piano. We'd have the low E, the B, E again. We'd have G sharp on the G string, the open B string, with an E on top of that. And really what you'll see if you were to remove the B, this B down here, that's actually that might be a more typical voicing for an E major chord on the piano, with the E down in the octaves and just the inverted E major up here. So of the open position chords on a guitar, the only voicing that would be similar on a piano would be the open E chord. So overall they may be similar, but not the same. So again, considering the question, are the chords used on a guitar the same as the chords used on a piano? We can say that theoretically speaking, yes, they are. They use the same notes, though the notes will be arranged differently. And of course, that arranging of notes, arranging how they're stacked or where they're repeated, is what we would call a voicing. And the voicings are quite different. So in that sense, the chords that are used on a guitar are very different from chords used on the piano. Okay, and that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Please click like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Now, I think this is actually a fascinating question because the answer seems very simple. Right away, I thought, well, of course. But then I quickly realized that, well, no, not at all. And there goes a fly.